State. On the discourse this morning, we look into the 23rd Journal of Black Innovation National Black Business Month. It gets underway in the United States as of the 30th of July. That's today here in South Africa, but they're still just a few hours behind. And it continues until the 22nd of September. The initiative celebrates Black enterprise, innovation, and economic empowerment across the African diaspora, with the year's program also welcoming the Director General of Tourism of South Africa, preserving heritage and creating opportunities for Black-owned businesses. Joining us from the United States is John William Templeton. He is the founder of the Journal of Black Innovation and architect of the National Black Business Month. Templeton's work over the past two decades have focused on documenting Black economic progress, preserving history, and advancing global Black entrepreneurship. Mr. Templeton, a very good morning. And by the way, thank you for agreeing to stay up to speak to us. Much appreciated. Let's kick off the discussion with the 23rd edition of the Journal of Black Innovation National Black Business Month. What exactly is it? What has been happening over the past 23 years? And also what inspired you to launch this initiative?
Well, the actual inspiration was the death of my younger brother in police custody in June of 2004. And I had just given a speech to the National Urban League on a report I had done on the state of Black business. And one of the recommendations was that we needed to do a branding exercise so that people understood the importance of those companies. So in his honor, I moved ahead and started in 2004. And we've done several things that are unique. It's not a celebration, but it's really a mobilization because in the United States, when we had slavery, the only way you could be free was to be in business. And when people would go into business, the first thing they would do was raise money to buy their family members. So Black business has been the funder of the Black liberation movement for the last 500 years. So it has a really special purpose beyond just making money. So we want to make sure that people understand the importance of choosing to do business with those companies. There are 4.4 million African American firms, and their revenues are 360 billion, which is only about 50 billion less than the whole GDP for South Africa. So it's a huge enterprise that we don't really realize how important it is. So what we do is we take each day we take a different industry to make sure that people don't pigeonhole and just think, oh, it's just a few barbershops and restaurants and that sort of thing. No, it's AI, as your advertisement just mentioned, the largest number in healthcare. So there's a great deal of expertise in HIV that you just mentioned. So we are involved in a number of different things, and we want to make sure that we cover the whole waterfront and build teams. And increasingly now we're building those teams across the entire diaspora. A couple of years ago, we started the 100 Cities initiative because there are 100 cities in Africa and the Caribbean with more than 1 million population. So we want to have a paradigm shift from African American companies trying to get a small contract with a big corporation to serving the needs of the 80 countries in the diaspora who have a combined budget of about $800 billion.
I'm going to stop you there because I still do want to continue zoning in on, I'm actually fascinated by what you're saying just in terms of economic history, but also, development economics, how black people got into business to basically buy the liberation of their kin. So just tapping into that history, how were they able to achieve this through enslavement? As in, I'd imagine it was illegal. So how were they able to break that barrier?
Well, in the, what we do on our site is we actually look at the history of Black businesses state by state. And so we dominated a number of industries, and it was that domination of those industries that allowed us to gain our freedom. So the first industry that we dominated was food. So, for instance, James Hemings, who was Thomas Jefferson's chef, brought ice cream and French fries and creme brulee to the United States. Our favorite foods started with this black chef that we don't get any credit for. The catering industry started in Philadelphia by a family called the Bogles, and it's not an accident that the Underground Railroad hub was in Philadelphia because those food businesses would fund the Underground Railroad, and they also funded the Black church. And so the most important thing the black businesses do is fund the black church, which is an $18 billion enterprise itself. I just came from Justice Revival in Oakland with Bishop Hezekiah Walker and a number of folks. So the black church, uh, you know, there were black businesses before there were black churches, and so without black businesses, there wouldn't be black churches.
And I also, when we speak about enslavement, it may seem quite jarring, but I think it's not quite such a juxtaposition because in South Africa, as you all know, there is this policy of black economic empowerment, and I believe it does have its origins in the United States. And I'm curious to know how America has experienced it, has used it for, creating or even bolstering black entrepreneurship. Has it worked?
Actually, we can report that it has. Our foundation has been the State of Black Business report that we've done every year, every May, and we have 10 key factors for Black business success. And so, what we've shown that our best practice is that we have to specifically target Black communities and Black owned businesses in order to make sure that they get the public procurement and also private procurement. And unless you do that specifically, it doesn't happen. So we had the flowering of our efforts between 2020 and 2024, when we had the largest investment in American history directly to black businesses. We got $16 billion through the PPP because of a report I did that identified a specific way to make sure that the money went to black owned businesses. And it actually had a $9,000 increase in average black income. So there are forces in the United States trying to get South Africa to get rid of black empowerment so that they can do the same thing in the United States. And we need to hold the line on that and make sure that it expands and becomes more effective, because the solution to the wealth disparities and the unemployment in South Africa is to have a much more robust black empowerment program.
And that's fascinating because there are those who point to it as being unsuccessful because of the selective manner in which it is implemented. And I want to.
Well, it's just not broad enough, and that's a big reason why we started doing our own research, because not only in the United States but in Africa, we never design policy at the scale that is needed. Um, Nobody realizes that uh, black businesses in the United States employ a third of the black civilian labor force, right? There are 45 million small and medium enterprises across sub Saharan Africa. So, every problem that Africa has, from health to education, gets solved if those businesses are more prosperous. And so, with 800 billion to work with, we can align African American firms and their expertise and their capital and work through the multilateral institutions like the Africa Club and really serve as the bankers for the rest of the diaspora. We are, 1.5 billion black folks, and 48 million of us in the United States make 40% of all the money for all the black people in the world. So, to the extent that we can get organized, then we can really fuel an acceleration of the progress in Africa and the Caribbean.
And I want to explore that further through your theme for this year's edition, Awakening the Ghosts of Black Business Giants. And I also want to start it from the genesis, the philosophy, like Booker T. Washington, for instance, like what has been the common thread that we can spread, across the diaspora, whether from the continent, as you mentioned, the Caribbean. And, this all occurs against the backdrop of, reparatory justice, the theme that all of these regions are fighting for. So, how do we build stronger black businesses, borrowing from history, but improving from it as well?
Well, on the 31st, I'm giving my report, A Love Supreme, sort of based on the centennial of John Coltrane. And I'm going to go through the 2,000 black business districts that were destroyed in the United States due to urban violence. You know, we haven't been successful, but the renaissance that people like Booker T. Washington and Marcus Garvey did in the early 20th century got burned out. And if it wasn't burned out, they built highways through the neighborhoods and knocked it down for urban renewal. So, despite all that, we have focused on education, and now in the United States, uh, half of the civilian labor force is college educated. So our businesses, our largest business now is sectors in healthcare. Second largest is in professional, scientific, and technical, which is why I'm so excited about the opportunity to really build teams with folks on the African continent. During the pandemic, I was working pretty closely with healthcare folks in South Africa to try to get vaccines into South Africa and to start vaccine production because doors that get closed in the United States are open in the African continent. And so we need to stop beating our head against the wall, fighting against monopolies, and come to the places where there's an open door for innovation.
I love that positivity because there is a tendency to think of black entrepreneurship in a negative way, that we're always crying about historical erasure or discriminatory policies. But it obviously is there for those who want to see the greatness of black businesses, the level of innovation that they bring to the fore. And I'd like you to reflect on that, particularly when you talk about this 100 cities project that you have, the kind of things that are not spoken about that the world can really learn from about black business and how they interact, even despite market forces that try and destroy their hustle, so to speak.
Well, I was editor of the San Jose Business Journal in the 1980s when Silicon Valley started. So I was there for the greatest wealth creation in history, and there was nothing particularly superhuman about those folks. It was just everything got aggregated in one place. So it isn't really rocket science. It's about putting the capital together, putting the education together. And so I'm so impressed over the 30 years that I've been covering this at how the African Development Bank and the African Export Import Bank have really galvanized Africa's ability to create objectives, put money behind it, and then bring folks from all over the continent to work on them. And so that doesn't get the headlines. Something like Africa CDC doesn't get headlines, but from my perspective, in 30 years, I mean, since the time of Nelson Mandela, Africa has advanced so rapidly. And so we need to get aboard that high speed rail and push it even faster.
And part of the plan, and I mentioned it in the introduction, is the tourism, heritage, and economic development route. You have invited South Africa's Director General of Tourism to be part of this year's events. Tell us a little bit more about why tourism occupies such a central place at the Business Summit.
Well, African Americans spend $100 billion on travel. So, um, moving any significant part of that to the African continent is transformational. We had the year of remembrance where folks kind of went back to Ghana for a while, but we need to spread it across the continent. And the whole point of the 100 Cities Initiative is to uh, step away from just looking at Africa as one big whole and say, well, we're going to connect Charlotte and Cape Town. We're going to kick, Lusaka and Los Angeles. And so we want to create those links between particular cities so that we start having those compacts where people are going back and forth and not just uh, going for vacations, but actually doing business so that, for instance, in Los Angeles, the head of the transit system is a black woman. So when cities in Africa want to develop transit systems, that's the kind of expertise that they should be going to. And so to really build those connections on a local level sort of gets past sort of the paralysis of just thinking, oh my God, it's so big. It's like, no, we need to be even down to the village, and every church in the United States needs to be connected with a small place in Africa so that commerce can go back and forth. Because the thing that we don't appreciate in the United States is our most important value is that we're Americans. So that means we can be an agent for those 45 million businesses across Africa to sell whatever they have in the United States. And it's really about just setting up the institutional structures, the payment systems. Africa's moving to a single currency to really facilitate that. And when you look at it from 30,000 feet, there's you can only be excited at the promise, and there are all kinds of efforts. Our enemies see this, so there are all kinds of efforts to divide us, to pit South Africa against Nigeria and Zimbabwe and all that sort of thing, and derail the G20. Because they understand that when we get it together, it's game over. So that's why we need to stay focused, just like Nelson Mandela was at Robben Island, just keep focused on the goal. And his example tells us that all we have to do is be united. I had a friend from South Africa come and visit the labor union. in San Francisco that refused to unload the ships that led to the divestment movement, eventually to the end of apartheid. So we have numerous examples in our history of how the only success we've had has been when we work together across the continent as one diaspora.
So much to talk about and so little time, because I really would have loved to hear your thoughts about building modern black economies and also the digital economy, how we can use it to help connect Africa, the Caribbean, and African American communities, as you spoke about. But I'm sure we will find another time. But thank you so much for, as I said, staying up to speak to us. John William Templeton, he's the founder of the Journal of Black Innovation and architect of the National Black Business Month, which gets underway from the 30th of July today here on this day, and it runs until the 22nd of September. That brings the time to exactly 8:30. Let's go back to the news desk for a final news update from Jwalani Tulongweb.
SABC News. Headlines. The African Perspective.
Thank you, Tsepiso. Good morning. Making headlines, Amnesty International has called for a war crimes investigation to what it described as summary killings of at least 19 Malian soldiers by members of armed groups after an ambush on the 18th of July. The global HIV response to providing valuable lessons for tackling other infectious diseases, including Ebola. This emerged at the 26th International AIDS Conference in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, where health experts are discussing future